Hey GBA fans, it's your friend Choice CJ here, and I'm coming back to you guys with my Week 9 battle of Season number 4 of the GBA D League, and we are going up against Zazo, aka Iron Flash Gaming, aka coach of the Detroit Butterfrees. Now, I do recommend you guys go check out my last week's game versus AA Round 2 for 20, if you did miss it. It was really exciting, it came down to the wire, it was a photo finish, it was a nail biter. Please go check that out, because it was really fun. And I'm happy to say we finally snapped our losing streak in that game. It was, like I said, a close game, a hard fought. Terrakion is the GOAT, came away with 6 kills in that game, was able to bring it back from a 5-1 situation, if I'm not mistaken. So that was really exciting. We're going to hope that Terrakion can recapture some of its magic from last week in this game. I actually just recorded this team builder, and I'm doing it again because I forgot to have the screen capture on. So let's see if I can do this a little bit better this time. And we'll kick things off by talking about Zazo's roster. He, of course, has the Garchomp, the Ferrothorn, Slowbro, Heracross, Talonflame, Dusclops, Mega Mawile, Zapdos, Crocodile, Blissey, and Toxicroak. So Zazo has one of the most balanced playstyle-oriented teams in the league, I think. The other one who has a really balanced team kind of like this is Goldoa Dragon, who we actually play in Week 11. But yeah, just all the bulky pivots that are on the team, Ferrothorn, Zapdos, Slowbro, Garchomp. You can even put Crocodile in that category to some extent because it does have reasonable physical bulk and that intimidating ability. You know, it makes his team very reliable defensively. And that's, without saying anything about mons like Blissey, which are just so hard to kill because you can't really status it. And it's only weak to fighting types. Luckily, I have one of the best fighting types in the format, I think. People say it's sort of Gen 6 oriented because it has that Talonflame on it. And, you see mons like Slowbro, and, that's a very Gen 6 mon. But Talonflame, even though it got nerfed in Gen 7, I think is still pretty spooky. And I do expect him to bring it because it's the only mon that he has that outspeeds my Terrakion naturally. And so he doesn't necessarily have to... what am I trying to say? Like, even though it doesn't necessarily have a thing to one-shot me, I think there's still some tricks that he could use to take out Terrakion with his Talonflame. In terms of my matchup, I feel like I have a couple of really good checks to his defensive mons, to his offensive mons, and his defensive mons, I can use something like Terrakion to break through, or my Doublade, or even my Darmanitan, I suppose, to break through. So why don't we just hop on into this team builder, and then we can switch over to the battle promptly afterwards. So first, we do have, again, a very similar Terrakion set to what I've been bringing this season. Rock Z with Swords Dance. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, is sort of how I feel with Terrakion this season. And it's not like there's a variety of sets that you can necessarily run with Terrak. You can run a Revenge Killer set, I suppose, but that's not the best use of Terrakion's skills this game. Because, again, it outspeeds everything but Talonflame, and at +2, nothing survives, essentially. The only thing that could potentially survive a +2 hit from Terrak is, Slowbro, or maybe, Choppleberry Ferrothorn or something like that. But in the case of Slowbro, if I blow my Rock Z, it's not living that either. So... when it's just so good at +2 versus the majority of his team, it's the best set to run. So call it unoriginal, whatever you like. It's the best set to run this week, I'm pretty sure. Rock's in the last slot because, again, I can expect him to make some switches. And so I think going for Rocks would be beneficial. I also just didn't really have room on my Swampert this week, I felt. We have a sort of standard spread enough speed on here for Garchomp. So not much more to say about that. Next, let's talk about our Doublade, which is also Swords Dance. Ghost is actually pretty good versus his team. It is only resisted by Blissey and by Crocodile, both of which are weak to fighting, so we are packing Sacred Sword for that reason. We have a pretty defensive spread this week. I think I have enough investment on here to take an Earthquake from Crocodile, if I'm not mistaken. And then we can retaliate with Sacred Sword, which is pretty good. And then... this is just a nice pivot into so many of his mons, like Blissey, Ferrothorn, Toxicroak, things like that. It prevents me from losing to Scarf Outrage, which, if you look at my team, otherwise really blows me back. So it was just a really sturdy mon to have on the roster this week. It could potentially switch in on Mawile. It depends on what sort of set he's running. It hits Dusclops extremely hard. So it has a lot of value both offensively and defensively this week, I must say. So if I can use this sort of as like a mid-game breaker and clear a path for Terrakion, that would be fantastic. That would be what I'm hoping for in this game. So let's take a look at some of the supporting mons this week. One of them, of course, is Swampert. We're running a pretty bulky but hard-hitting Swampert this week. We have a lot of attack investment, as you can see, Adamant Nature with 100 EVs here. And we just have 4 attacks. Ice Punch for hitting Garchomp, Superpower for hitting Blissey, and for hitting Crocodile. I don't remember the EVs off the top of my head. Like, you'll have to bear with me. It's been like 2 weeks since we played this game, and I'm actually putting this up about a day late. So I don't remember everything off the top of my head. So thanks for understanding that it's just been a little while since we played this game. But yeah, I think like I put a lot of attack EVs on there so that way I could deal with like defensive Blissey and also defensive Garchomp. A Waterfall is mandatory for hitting Talonflame as hard as possible. Earthquake I wanted just as good stab because like Slowbro is very easily able to wall this set. So if somehow I get it low enough, I can hit it hard with Earthquake for a few times. Yeah, so with the Aguav Berry on here, it's really nice. It sort of gives my Swampert an extra life in this game. You know, if I switch it in on Talonflame a couple times, I think we might even be able to take 2 Brave Birds from Talonflame with this set from like an offensive Talonflame. So it's just a very reliable mon this week, being able to pivot into a lot of his offensive threats. He can probably take a hit from Heracross if needed. By the way, Blade is very, very good at checking Heracross. I don't think I mentioned that. So anyway, let's go to another sort of bulky offensive mon this week, and that is Lottie. It's less bulky, of course, than Swampert in terms of the investment, but luckily Lottie has plenty of natural bulk to help it out. And surprisingly, like this coverage hits most of his team relatively hard. You know, Ice Beam is there to hit things like Crocodile and Garchomp and Zapdos for as much damage as possible. Hidden Power Fire hits some of his most likely switch-ins to Lottie, being Ferrothorn and Mawile. And then other mons like Slowbro, which could otherwise wall this set, don't really appreciate being toxic. Because even though they have, Slowbro has Regenerator and can pivot in and out and stuff like that, it, is annoyed by having Toxic in general, and it helps me deal with like some Calm Mind variants. So I think it's a pretty sturdy mon this week. We have enough investment on here, I believe, for Garchomp once again. So yeah, because Garchomp hits 333 at level 100. I put this at level 100 because Hidden Power Fire, the EVs are annoying at level 50. But if you go to level 100, you can have 31 IVs and everything, because you can only use bottle caps to level 31, or level 100. You can't use it at level 50. So next, we do have Darmanitan. This is my primary response to Mawile, which admittedly is not maybe an amazing response. If it's an attack-invested Mawile, it still does a chunk with Play Rough. But even after Rocks, we should be able to live 1 Play Rough and then get up to about 50% and be able to retaliate back with Flare Blitz versus that thing. Toxic is there as bait for some of his most common switch-ins to Darmanitan, namely the Slowbro. It's also there potentially for Blissey. Superpower is also a really good move for hitting Blissey. Besides the obvious fact that it's super effective versus it, like Flare Blitz probably by itself does more to Blissey, or like a similar amount, but the problem with Flare Blitz on a Blissey is that you take so much recoil, you like basically kill yourself. So I don't want to take recoil versus a Blissey. And then Rock Slide is there for things like Zapdos, Talonflame, etc. This is a bit bulky enough to take one hit from Talonflame as well, and do a decent bit back to it in its own recoil, because Brave Bird obviously has recoil damage, and we can be able to take that thing out with Rock Slide. And I am expecting like a Will-O-Wisp Talonflame for hitting Terrakion. Like that's probably his best way besides like a Revenge Killer such as Garchomp or Crocodile for hitting me. So Darmanitan doesn't care as much about Will-O-Wisp, so that's definitely nice. Last mon on the team is Raikou. So like I just mentioned, I'm expecting Talonflame and then potentially a Scarf Garchomp or a Scarf Crook. Choice Scarf Raikou is able to outspeed all of those things and do tremendous amounts of damage to them with either Electric Stab or with HP Ice or whatever. I guess Crocodile doesn't necessarily take as much, but maybe we can just pivot into Swampert and take hits from that thing. So, but yeah, Raikou just gives me a very solid Revenge Killer versus his team. It's faster than everything unless he brings a Scarf Talonflame, which would be totally nuts, I think. So it just was a good safety net for me because, again, I'm very scared of something like Scarf Outrage if I do lose my Doublade, which is not hard to do in this game. It's very, very pressured. So that is the team, you guys. Let's now swap on over into the battle. So as you can see, our good pal Matty Brolic here, aka Zazo, brought his Talonflame, Slowbro, Garchomp, Mega Mawile, Zapdos, and Crocodile. So no major surprises here. I would say Slowbro makes sense. It's like his best defensive check for something like Terrakion. It could also be like a bulky Garchomp. But again, I'm still potentially thinking it's like a Scarf Garchomp because it could very easily revenge kill Terrakion. Could alternatively be Scarf Crocodile, but Crocodile as well could be like an Assault Vest set for trapping Lottie. So we're going to have to be careful and do some scouting in the early game to figure out exactly what all of his sets are. Things that he left on the bench include Ferrothorn, Heracross, Dusclops, Blissey, and Toxicroak. Yeah, I'm not really surprised that he left any of those on the bench, to be honest. I think that the 6 that he brought were the 6 best. So we're going to have to be very careful in this game. Like something like an offensive Mawile, of course, could be very spooky. Talonflame is very annoying. Zapdos is also kind of hard to deal with. I don't have any super effective stab outside of Terrakion to deal with that thing. So if my Terrakion goes down, he could very easily Roostall me out of the game. So yeah, definitely gonna be very tricky. So in terms of leads, I think Swampert's a pretty decent overall lead versus everything. He doesn't, like, he could have grass coverage on something on his team, but it kind of looks unlikely, right? Like, unless he's like Hidden Power Grass on Zapdos or something like that. But if he's Hidden Power Grass, well, I guess Hidden Power Grass kind of makes sense because I don't have any other. Well, I guess the reason it would make sense is that he can't hit Lottie that hard. Maybe he could be like HP Grass with Toxic or something like that. Or maybe he has a U-turn for hitting Lottie. But yeah, Swampert otherwise just isn't threatened by a lot of his team. If he wants to lead with something like Garchomp or Crocodile for early rocks, I can threaten those right away. If he wants to lead with Talonflame, I can threaten that right away. So on and so forth. So, or if he wants to go into Mawile and get the immediate Mega Evolution, I can threaten that as well. So with that in mind, we're just going to go for that Swampert lead. We're going to hit play and wish good luck to our good pal Zazo. I told him going into this game, or at the start of the season rather, that he was not going to 6-0 me. And he goes, sorry pal, I am. I'm just going to totally 6-0 you. So if we come out with anything less than a 6-0, I'm going to call that a moral victory, even if we do catch the W at the end of the day. So anyway, he leads Talonflame and goes for U-turn. The damage suggests that it is indeed banded. And banded definitely makes sense, and you have to bear with me as my alarm is going off. I have to send out a wedding invitation tonight, and I wanted to make sure I didn't forget. But yeah, so it's a banded Talonflame, which definitely makes sense because, again, it gives him kind of his best opportunity to revenge kill Terrakion without relying on something like Scarf Garchomp or Scarf Crocodile. So it's interesting what that potentially says about those two sets. I go into my Lottie as he brings in his Slowbro on my Swampert, and he immediately goes for Calm Mind, which is definitely scary. Luckily, I've got this Toxic in the back, which can help me deal with the Slowbro relatively well. And he shows Psyshock. So we know at least 2 of the moves in his moveset. He does land a crit, which is a little bit of a bummer, but that's okay. I don't have a great move to hit this, as I mentioned in my team builder. And so I'm pretty sure I just go... So I go for a Roost to heal off the damage that this thing done. I was going to say I go for Hidden Power Fire, predicting them with Small Wild to come in. I do have to make many aggressive plays in this game, and we'll try and bring them all up as they come along. But yeah, he is able to go into his Mawile, get off the Mega Evolution. I go into my Termanitan, which is pretty bulky, meant to deal with this Mawile, and it does about 100 damage. And so this suggests that it actually probably doesn't have much attack investment. So the fact that he brought it in on Lottie makes sense if he brought it as like a Spadef set. The typing that Mawile has allows it just to be a very good check for Lottie. I double into Raikou because I'm expecting his Slowbro to come in here, but he instead goes into Garchomp. And so I don't know exactly what sort of Garchomp this is. I'm gonna just go ahead and trade my Raikou for some damage on this Garchomp. If it wasn't offensive, if it was offensive, it had a chance to do a really large chunk of damage. It turns out that it was at least a little bulky because I only did about 75% to it. But yeah, if it was like an offensive Garchomp, I was willing to take a risk there. So that's one of my aggressive plays in this game. I am in here with my Lottie, and he has a Slowbro in. I go for Hidden Power Fire, expecting maybe that Mawile to come back in, and he just keeps on Calm Minding. So the fact that he's got Calm Mind here, even though he's toxic, suggests to me that he's most likely Rest, which is really making me shit my pants, because then I really don't have a good way to prevent this thing from setting up. And so I figured my best way to deal with this is to go into SD Doublade. If I get up an SD, I should be able to easily take it out with Shadow Claw. And the fact that he only has Psyshock versus my physically defensive Doublade makes it a pretty reasonable check. So I did go for the SD as he preserves the Slowbro for later. The fact that I was able to get that in on the turn that he went for Rest was also really nice because it gave me the Swords Dance for free. I go for the Shadow Claw versus a Zapdos, and this might have been a bit of a mistake. I had to give him a lot of HP. I gave up a lot of HP on my Doublade in order to get that damage off on Zapdos. And this reveals that it's got a lot of special attack investment, which is definitely spooky. So anyway, Lottie's going to be able to come in and take the next T-Bolt. I go for Ice Beam, trying to take out the Zapdos, and it doesn't quite work. He's able to go safely into his Mawile here. As I go back into my Darmanitan. So based on the damage rolls, again, I'm pretty sure that this is uninvested. I can come in here and pretty safely survive and take this thing out. I do go for the Flare Blast as he once again goes on into the Slowbro. There's no point in like clicking Toxic trying to predict anything, because of course this Slowbro was asleep. So now I'm going to go back on into my Doublade once again, because he has 2 turns of sleep that he has to get through. But he's going to make a double again, this time on into his Zapdos. So he caught me on that one. I don't have a way to threaten this right away. A couple turns ago, if I had gone for the Shadow Sneak instead of the swap out into Lottie, I might have had a better chance of just eliminating that thing outright, but it wasn't the play that I made at the time. I switched on into Swampert, because at this point, this is sort of my best way of dealing with the Zapdos, and he goes to go for the Toxic, which is pretty annoying, so it's reducing Swampert's longevity by quite a bit. I expect him to potentially go for Roost, because, you know, generally versus Swampert, I'm not going to want to click Earthquake versus him. But, you know, he anticipates that and goes on into Slowbro, so, you know, he makes a really nice read there. You know, he could have also anticipated maybe just like a Waterfall or something, and that's a pretty safe switch. So since this thing still has 2 turns of sleep, and I don't want to risk any damage onto my Doublade, I figure like it's a risk worth taking to go into Terrakion and potentially set up an SD, because SD into Rock Z could definitely take out that Slowbro. But he makes the prediction and goes into Garchomp instead. And I switch out fearing that he might be Scarf, and he instead goes for Rocks. So it's looking a little bit less likely that he's Rocks or that he's Scarf at this point. He could still be Rocks with Scarf, you never know. But he goes into his Slowbro. So Swampert can do practically nothing versus Slowbro. And I once again makes the same play of going into Terrakion. And like I'm just crossing my fingers, hoping he doesn't roll Psyshock. He's got just a 1 in 3 chance of getting the Psyshock. That's like about as good of a chance of missing a Focus Blast. So, you know, got my fingers crossed. I get a little greedy. I go for Rocks instead of Swords Dance right away. The reason being, like, I thought that he might go into one of his Revenge Killers on that first turn, but he ended up not doing that. And so on my next turn, I know that I can survive a Psyshock. I do go for that SD, and now I'm looking pretty good versus this Slowbro. I don't immediately go for the Rock Z, because I am expecting him to scout for it. So I immediately go for a Stone Edge as he sacks off his Zapdos. And what I'm kind of hoping is that he goes right on into the Slowbro again so I can blow that thing back. But he instead goes into the Crocodile, screaming that this is a Scarf Crook. And I'm going to switch out on into the Lottie, expecting his EQ. He actually goes for Superpower. So that to me says that he probably is now thinking that I'm Sugar Berry. Which, like, given the fact that I didn't go for Rock Z versus that Zapdos switch in, it kind of makes sense that he would be thinking that. So there's a little bit of mind games going on here, which is nice. I'm able to easily go for the Hidden Power Fire because he can't stay in and go for another Superpower versus me reasonably. And so he does go into Mawile before switching on back into his Slowbro, which is looking very, very healthy, which is definitely scary for me. And so at this point in the match, I'm just trying to come up with the safest way to either get my Terrakion in or my Doublade in. Because with boosts, those two Mons can potentially deal with this Slowbro. But I don't really want to switch either of them in because they're both low on HP. Terrakion is going to get killed by one Psyshock easily. One Psyshock probably won't kill Doublade. But I still want to try and keep that thing at a little bit of health. So again, I can potentially take one Psyshock later in the game. Like switching in on a Psyshock and then taking a second is pretty crappy. But if I sack something and then bring in Doublade, it puts me in a slightly better position. I go into Doublade here, hoping that he rests this turn, but he does not. So it's kind of the crappy situation that I'm putting myself in, like I just said. So I took a risk, hoping that he would go for rest on that turn. Didn't work out. He should switch out, and I am expecting him to switch out either into probably into his Crook. Because Crook has a really good chance of revenge killing my Doublade. But he instead goes into Garchomp, and so because I went for Sacred Sword and not Shadow Claw, not only do I die to the combination of Rough Skin and Rocky Helmet, but I don't even kill this Garchomp. So, yeah, I now know that it's a Scarf Crocodile, and so that suggested that the Garchomp probably wasn't going to be Scarf, but now we've got confirmation that it is Rocky Helmet. And so he can once again come in very easily on my Lottie with his Slowbro, because I don't have an attack that can hit it super effectively, and if it gets poisoned, again, he has the opportunity to rest. So, I went for an Ice Beam, thinking that he might not rest immediately, like maybe he'll go for one Calm Mind, since I just got burned from switching out too early. So unfortunately now I've switched out too late, and now this Slowbro can come in here and go for Sleep Talk versus me. So, luckily he can't really hurt Lottie all that much without any boosts. He needs several boosts in order to do tremendous damage to me. So my plan is basically just to stay in here and wait for him to wake up, try and Toxic him, and then the next time he goes for rest, try and switch out. And my alarm is going off again, my goodness. Okay, now that it's all taken care of. I'm definitely not redoing this because this is already late, so again, thanks for bearing with me. He goes for a Sleep Talk there after he wakes up. That was probably just a simple misclick. I don't really think too much of it. For some reason, this turn was the turn I decided to go on into my Terrakion as he goes for a Calm Mind. I didn't know if maybe he would switch out, anticipating the Toxic or something. I think it was just overall just a misplay on my part. Maybe he was going to go for rest again, because at least if he's rested, he can safely Calm Mind with Sleep Talks. That's maybe what I was thinking, but it definitely didn't work out there. So I switched back on into Lottie. I should quickly go for the Roost here, and then I think maybe it's the next turn that I go for Toxic, or maybe I just spam Ice Beams, trying to get him as low as possible. Also, if I can get a crit on an Ice Beam, it's not going to one-shot, but at least it does a little bit of damage. But yeah, it's kind of the same idea, trying to get into a situation where this Slowbro is going to go for a rest, and then on the turn that it rests, I get in my Terrakion and can potentially blow it up, since I now have lost my Doublade, and it's kind of my best way of dealing with the Slowbro. Because at least if I bring in the Doublade, and he rolls a good Sleep Talk roll and gets the Psyshock, I don't think my Doublade will immediately die, but Terrakion, of course, definitely will at this point. But it doesn't matter, because now Doublade is dead. So, he goes for Calm Mind again. I've sort of lost track of how many boosts he has. It's either +3 or +4. It's getting really close to expecting the rest, but this is not quite the turn. He doesn't have to rush into it because he's got so many special defense boosts at this time that he's not really taking any damage besides toxic damage. My Ice Beams is not doing any reasonable amount of damage. Maybe it would have been nice to go with Dragon Pulse instead of Ice Beam, but Ice Beam was nice because it did hit the Crook a little bit harder, which is not an unreasonable thing for him to bring an Assault Vest Crook. So I do get this right. He does go for rest on this turn that I bring in my Terrakion. I have to play aggressive. Once again, he should be expecting me to go for the SD here, because that's my only way of breaking this Slowbro. So I anticipated the switch into the Crook, the Scarf Crook, because if he goes into Scarf Crook on my Swords Dance, my turn is wasted. He can just easily revenge kill me. He can go for almost any type of move and take me out. But he instead stays in and is able to roll the Psyshock, and with the Terrakion gone, I gotta tell you, the game's basically over. So After the Lottie, after the Raikou, not the Raikou, the Darmanitan, after the Swampert go down, we are going to suffer a 5-0 loss, which is a major bummer for sure. But basically, he just brought a perfect set versus me. The Slowbro was really fantastic. He anticipated that I wouldn't bring the Drapion, and so Mono Psyshock with Rest was going to be his best way to beat me. I do have a few Mons with Taunt on my team, like Terrakion and Darmanitan, but it's not reasonable for Terrakion or Darmanitan to stay in versus a Slowbro just to taunt it. And so without something like Taunt Drapion, this was a really killer set versus me. I brought plenty of status. I had 2 Mons with Toxic, and 2 Mons that can reasonably expect Slowbro to switch into them, but he was able to very easily anticipate that and just bring Rest. So really killer set. He just played, prepped great, and he played great too. Like, it wasn't just enough that he brought the great Slowbro set. He also had to bring the right supporting cast in order to deal with my checks to it. So, like the SD Doublade, for example, could pretty easily take on Slowbro that's not packing Scald, but he had the Rocky Helmet Chomp to do a very good job of taking that on. I let him use the Zapdos to get damage on my Doublade, which is definitely unfortunate. I guess I could have gone into Swampert or something to that situation, but that wasn't the play I made. So he prepped and played great, so props to him. I was in a situation in this game where I had to make a lot of aggressive plays, and I think a lot of them worked. Like the fact that I didn't blow the Rock Z versus the Zapdos, I think was good. Trying to get myself into bringing in my Doublade or my Terrakion, anticipating the rest from the Slowbro. I did that correctly twice. I think I did it incorrectly once or twice too. Like in the late game there, switching out the Lottie versus Terrakion, which is definitely a bummer. Other aggressive plays that didn't work out so much. It was sort of hit or miss with the Lottie hitting the Mawile on switch in, so that was a bummer. Not interpreting what set the Garchomp was unfortunate, because that means that the Raikou went down pretty early, basically for nothing. It didn't even get it in range of the Sacred Sword, like I said. And it would have been nice if I could have gone for Shadow Claw versus that, but I was expecting the Crocodile, like I mentioned, because Crocodile just doesn't really care that much about the Ghost-type move. So a little bit of a mixed bag, but in general, I like to play games where I'm the one making the aggressive plays. And there was a point there where I felt like Zazo was reacting to what I was doing. Like when he went into the Crocodile going for Superpower. I was happy that I was sort of able to throw him off there. That's about as much as I can take out of this game in terms of the positives. So it is going to be a pretty devastating loss for us. He messaged me after the match and mentioned that I could have timer stalled him to make the differential a little bit better. But at this point in the season, the differential doesn't matter that much for me. Mostly I just wanted the extra few minutes so I could pack up for the evening. I think I went to the movies. We saw, what movie did we see? We saw Ant-Man and the Wasp the night that I faced Zazo. So that was pretty fun afterwards. So, Zazo is a controversial guy in the community. He makes a lot of jokes that not a lot of people agree with, and I don't say that I always agree with his jokes. But I think at the end of the day, Zazo truly is a nice person. You just sort of have to get to know him. So he's rough around the edges. He named all of his Pokemon after porn stars. So if you're not into that brand of humor, I totally get it. But he means well, and he was a very good sport after the game, and sent me his sets and everything. So all in all, I think I have a positive opinion of Zazo after this match. So shoutouts to him for being cool. I hope you go far in playoffs, and show us all that we're the ones who are washed up, not you. So that's gonna do it. We have a battle versus Deebs, coach of the Calgary Flame Wheels, next week. I have a very, very small chance of making playoffs. A very specific set of conditions have to occur in order for me to make it. I'm at 3-6 now. If I win out and go to 5-6, I can make it. If things like certain things happen, like Randy losing out or Melon losing out or something like that. And also, the differentials have to be very specific. Like Techno, I can leap ahead of him if he loses 5-0 or better in his next two matches or something like that. So it's very unlikely, but we're gonna do our best. And Deebs is a good pal. So I'm happy to give him my best shot, even if there's not much on the line. So make sure you tune in for that next week. Make sure you check back to the channel for all sorts of other gaming and Pokemon content. And until the next time, I'll see you guys later.